weekend warriors, welcome back to the workshop. Just like I promised in the last video, this week we're going to do the screen stretcher build. And the screen stretcher, it's pretty simple. I mean, it is based on this sled right here. 4 of these guys. And it's all pretty easy. I mean, I've got a base holding things together. I got a sled, I got a drawbar, I got the pieces to make it draw together. I got a little wooden handle here to make it easy to draw it in and out. It's mostly cross cuts and ripping, but there's a couple technique operations. We've got to do a dado for the drawbar and the sled. We've got to do a dado down the drawbar along with a little pointed divot, just like I showed you in the original screen stretcher video of the one I took this apart and made this one out of. So let me get started. I mean, I'm not going to bore you with all the different cuts. That we'll go through that real quick, and I'll just stop and talk when it comes time for another technique. So hang on and we'll start the cutting. Okay, here's one of those technique parts. My drawbars are 1.5 inch thick. My screens are only 1 3/8 inch thick. So just so I can make sure that the material is sitting on the edge or on the face of the screen and not being held off the screen by the drawbar, I want to narrow these down a little bit. So I'm going to cut an extra 3/16 off of one of the faces. Now normally I would use my planer for this, but if you don't have a planer, doesn't mean you're out of luck. And all I'm going to do then is take that 3/16 of an inch off using my table saw and set up as a rip. Want to do this in fine increments just because we don't want to totally goof up the face of the drawbar. So okay, now it's time to lay out the handles for these things. I've got all the other pieces pretty well cut up. When I make a handle, it's generally about 4.5 inches long, so I'm going to start laying out 4.5 inches there. And then I'm usually about 1 1/4 inches at the bottom, thereabouts. But now to lay it out, I make use of washers, some good sized washers. And what I do is I lay out one washer, and of course I do have to think about, let's see, 1 1/4, half that is about 5/8. So let's see here, 4 5/8, right about there. Let's lay that out. Almost forgot that part. Okay, now I use washers to do the rest of the layout. And what I do is I take this washer and I center it about there. And I take this washer and I center it about up there, centering the line on the washers. So I've got a 1/4 inch washer at this end, that is 1/4 inch opening in the middle. And then it looks like about 3/8 on this side. So it gives me enough girth. And all I do is kind of round these guys off like that. Round this one off up here like that, and give myself a little bit of a middle mark so I'll know where to drill my hole. There we go. And now whatever I did with my ruler, Boy, oh boy, just set it down. Oh well. Just take a straight edge and I kind of line up the rounded edges there. And now I can go to the bandsaw, and I'll point to that. I can go to the bandsaw, cut this one out, and that gives me the layout for the rest of them. So I'll go do that now. Okay, there's a nice rough shape for a handle. All I got to do now is copy this off to the rest of them and drill the holes, and I'm set to go. Okay, we've come to the part where we need to cut some slots and some dados. And to do that, I'm going to use a stacked dado set. Now, if you don't know what a stacked dado set is, it's real simple. And this is the one that the Shopsmith markets. And it's no different than any other stacked dado set. It's just a little bit smaller, maybe. What it is you have two blades that stack together. Now, depending on the width of the cut you want to make, you have chippers that stack in between to widen out the cut. So you'll cut the edges with the blades, and then you'll just chip out, gouge out the center section with the chippers. It's pretty much as easy as that. Well, let's see. Make sure I get everybody put back where they belong here. Now, at the moment, I've got another one already mounted on the arbor for the Shopsmith. So I'll go ahead and put this away, and we can get going. Okay, now that I got that put away, we can go ahead and get going here. So I've got to cut a 1/4 inch slot, about a 1/4 inch deep, on my drawbars and my drawbar caps. So here are my drawbars. I've got my fence set up 3/8 from the closest cutting edge. So I'm going to end up from the face of the drawbar 3/8 of an inch deep. That's where I'm going to end up with my slot. Of course, it's going to be on the smoother side. Not much to it here. Just got to make sure I don't get my fingers cut. And my ears. Okay, now I'm ready to cut the dados in the drawbars and in the base, the cross pieces that are going to keep everything intact while we're stretching. So what I've done is I've added chippers to my dado set, so it's sitting at about 1 inch now. I've replaced the plate in the saw to accommodate the 1 inch cut, because the metal plate that was there was only 3/8 of an inch wide. I've set the depth to match the sled. Yeah, that's the sled. I've matched the depth to the thickness of the sled, and as you can see here, I've marked out where the dado is supposed to be. Now all I need to do is pull out my step stool because I'm short. Make sure that my cutting edge is where I want it to be. And first thing I'll do is I'll cut out this section, then I'll cut out this section, then I'll nibble out the middle. And I can't make any mistakes that way. So off we go. Okay, that pretty much fits, as they say, like a glove. A tight glove, but a glove. Okay, now it's a case of wash, rinse, repeat 3 more times. So I'll get back to you when I'm done with that. Okay, I just got a whole bunch of wedge locks or mesh locks, and they're not ready to use yet, nor are my drawbars. We need to do some router work. We need to put, and let me come up close here. We need to put this point on the mesh lock, and yep, there we go. And we need to put the corresponding trough into the drawbar. So that means some router work. Now, last time I showed you that the Shopsmith, you can use it as an overhead router. But when doing operations like this, overhead routing might not be the best idea. This is why I've kept my saw crate set up as a router table, and it fits right on the bars of my Shopsmith. But on top of that, I modified my Shopsmith so it will tilt the opposite direction, so the motor will be underneath the table, and therefore I've got an under router with my old Shopsmith Mark V 500. So let me configure that, and you'll get to see how it works. I put my my router bit chuck into the power takeoff, and in that chuck I put a chamfer bit that looks pretty much like this, 45-degree angle cuts. And I've set the height on that to go about halfway up on the stock. So I'm just going to nick out a 45-degree cut right here on the edge. I've also put a feather board in to make sure I get constant pressure on the workpiece as it goes through, because I am going to switch my hand positions at least once. Okay. So now it's just a matter of making things go. Okay, and this is what I end up with. A nice little pointy edge on there, which is going to fit perfectly into the drawbar when I'm done with the drawbar. So hang on, let me finish these up and then we'll talk about drawbars. All right, now I've reset the router, or the Shopsmith table. Anyway, the configuration. In the chuck, I've put a panel pilot bit, and we're just going to use the tip of the bit. We're not going to use the cutting edges down on the sides here. And it's set up to pretty much just so the chamfer starts at the base of the slot here. And I've set up my fence once again, so I'm 3/8 of an inch away from the cutting edge, so it'll match up pretty much perfectly. Now it's just a matter of doing it. And as you can see here, we got a nice chamfered bottom on the bottom of that slot. Perfect for accepting the mesh lock bar. So now I'll finish them up and come back when there's something else to do. Hang on. All right, it's time to do some assembly. Now I need to press in the T-nuts, and I also need to get the T-nuts in on the base here. Now these larger ones I usually take over to the vise and press them in, and that's what I'm going to do this time. So for the moment we'll just put these aside. These guys, since they recess down, it's a little bit harder to do it in the vise unless I've got a stack of washers or something. Another thing you can do is take a little piece of conduit. It's about 3/4 of an inch in diameter. Set them on down in there, and those T-nuts are set. Now, I'm not worried about ever pushing these out again because the piece that's getting glued on here, or getting put on here, is going to get glued in place. But before I do that, I need to go press the T-nut. So I'll be back. Okay, now the T-nuts are pressed into place. Pressed in on here. All I have to do is mount this guy up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue it and bolt it in place because the draw blocks go under an enormous amount of pressure when you're stretching the screen. So I got to make sure that they're not going to be able to come off. So suspenders and a belt. Okay, so now by using the drill bits that I did, the sizes that is, I have set this thing up so I've got a little bit of play and I'm able to square it up a little bit easier. Now, why am I not adding any hardware to this? Well, what's going to happen when the drills are set for the holes are drilled for the cap is we're going to get a couple of bolts that go through here anyway. So I'm not going to worry about setting up hardware now. I'm just going to clamp it in place, and this guy's going to dry overnight. The stationary block, which will be here, also gets glued down. And then from below, I thread through some carriage bolts and use a couple of nuts and washers and tighten that right on down. So once again, I want to make sure that I have it glued up. Okay, now I just have to repeat those two processes 3 more times. So everything will get to set overnight, and we'll do the final assembly tomorrow. Okay, we're back. Everything's gotten to sit overnight and dry up, so today we get to do all the final assembly stuff. What I have here is our cross base. This is the frame that holds the screen stretcher when you're stretching a screen. And as you can see, it's held together just with a lap joint. And we cut the dados for that yesterday. Now, the problem here is when we start putting screens under pressure, these 2x4s want a bow. Now, that for this one that'll be on the bottom, that's not a big deal because it gets bound up and tightens up on the one that's on top. But the one on top wants to bow away from the joint. So to help that, we put on a stiffener piece. Now, what I've done here is, you can see I've done a center line down all 4 boards and one on the stiffener. And then, of course, you can see I clamped it into place. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to drill holes straight on down. These are going to be 9/32 to accept 1/4-inch T-nuts and 1/4-inch bolts, and this is just going to get held on with 4 bolts. And that will be what assembles our cross piece. When we don't need the screen stretcher, we can pull 2 of the bolts out, disassemble the cross base, and it's a lot easier to store that way. Okay, next thing we got to do before we can put things together is we have to drill the holes for the binder bolts that go into the drawbars. And the trick is getting the holes in exactly the right place in both the bar and the bar cap. Now, little trick that I do is I take a spline the same size as one of our mesh locks, put it down in there, only it's not as tall as a mesh lock, and stick it into place. Then I add a couple of clips. Okay, now my cap is marked off to the locations I want the holes. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an 1/8 inch drill bit to basically mark the location all the way through the drawbar and the cap, and then I can go back and drill the right size hole for the bolts and the T-nuts and the recesses for T-nuts where I need them. So off we go. Okay, got those done. I need to do it to the other 3 bars. Then I'm going to go ahead and get these things assembled with bolts and T-nuts, and then it's going to be time to assemble the individual stretching sleds, and then we'll get the whole thing done. Okay, now we get to start putting the sleds together. What we're going to do here is we're going to put the sled guides onto the base. Now what you see is I've got the sled mounted onto the base. I've got it clamped in place, and it is lined up with the center line on the front and the back. So I know I'm going to be running on the center. And now this is going to be really easy because the sled guides don't take a lot of pressure, believe it or not. They just sort of steer things along a little bit. So to put them down, all I'm going to do is use a little bit of hot glue and some brads and on and lickety split, and it'll be done. And then, just for extra giggles, get out of my way and there we go. Sled guides are in place. Now let's line the sled back up in there and watch it go. Now to finish it off, I need to put a capture bar across the top, and to do that I'm just going to use a piece of 1/4 inch stock that I'll cut the length, and I'll screw down because there's times we have to take it off so we can take the sled off, especially when it comes time to mount it on the X frame or the cross frame, because one of the mounting holes happens to be right there. So to get everything lined up, it's a good idea to pull the sled off. Yep, there we go. Okay, now I'll get these guys attached, and I'll do the same thing for the other side. The other side has to be separated by 21.5 inches or 11 3 or 10 3/4 from center on either one. So I'll take care of that. You all sit back, and I'll be back twitches when it's time to finish putting it together and test it. Okay, we've reached the point where we need to put the crank together. Now the crank's a little bit different from what I normally do because I normally use a full thread bolt 8 inches long. However, my hardware store doesn't use that vendor anymore, so I can't get a fully threaded 8-inch bolt. And I really don't want to spend the time this time using my die set to thread the bolt all the way down. So what I did is I took a piece of all thread and cut it into 8-inch sections, and then welded the all thread into the T-nut that we put into the handle a while back. So now all I have to do is put it together. So what we're going to do here, and if you hear scampering in the background, that's my granddaughter and her friends playing. So put it through, we'll throw a washer in place, and then we're going to use a nylon lock nut So normal metal threads with a nylon lock to it. Whoops. And we'll thread that on down through. And it's a 13 millimeters, so grab hold of it with a 13 millimeter wrench and just wind it on down. So we're almost there, and still a little loose. We're going to tighten it up a little bit more. There we go. Now we'll put the sled into place. Now something I should mention, on the sled, on the adjustable block here, on the T-nut that we put into there, I've also added 2 screws to either side to lock it into place. Because if you get overly rambunctious when you're threading it in or out, it's possible to dislocate that T-nut. But with those 2 screws in place, T-nut's going to stay there. Okay, I think that's far enough. Now let's put that top brace in place. And wind it all the way back. And I'll go ahead and screw those screws back in. There we go. There it's at the stop. Now we're going to go ahead and crank it forward to the stop. And that's all there is to it. This one is done. I just need to repeat for the next 3. And then we're ready to put screen mesh into a screen. So I'll be back when that happens. Okay, here we have it, the complete item. I've got a old wooden screen that I don't use anymore set in. I've got a piece of chiffon because I'm not wasting money on a piece of real screen mesh for a demonstration. But I'm ready to stretch, so here we go. This is the first time this one has had any stretch put on. Okay, it's all stretched. It's tight or tighter than what I get from the factory. I'd say I've got a functional screen stretcher here. Now here comes the fun part. And I don't get to do this very often, but I know a couple of guys I've been working with, screen printing, wood building, all kinds of stuff like that, helping them make a few extra bucks here and there. And they need a screen stretcher. So, Los Hermanos Cortez, this one is yours. Somebody come and get it. It's cluttering up my garage already. For the rest of you, until the next project, y'all keep up the good fight, and I'll see you then. Bye.